So this is a time series question from the 2011 exam, investigating temperatures in Rome and Nairobi. So if you take a minute, I would suggest pausing the video and actually read all this information, because it'll be important to you. And I'm just going to get straight to the first question, so I'll leave it up to you to read that stuff. Is Richard correct to believe that the temperature in Rome is higher than the temperature in Nairobi? So Rome is warmer. Justify your answers using your graph. So the whole way through this, we really want to make sure that we're using numbers and evidence as much as we can. So Richard, we're trying to say, is he correct to believe that the temperature in Rome is higher than the temperature in Nairobi? So let's look at this. So we have a max and a minimum temperature, so you can think about this as your daytime and this as your nighttime, if that's an easier way to think of it, in Nairobi. And you can see that the nighttime temperatures are always above 10 degrees all year long, and that the daytime temperatures are usually between 20 and like 26 degrees. And if we look at Rome, we have our nighttime and our daytime. So the minimum temperatures at night tend to get down to 5 degrees, and the minimum temperature during the day is sometimes around as low as 12 degrees. So there's definitely times of the year where Rome is much colder than Nairobi. If you think about Nairobi, the nighttime temperatures are always above that line, and the daytime temperatures are always above that line. So there's quite a lot of the year where Rome is actually colder than the equivalent time of year in Nairobi. So if we think about writing this, I'd say no. Richard is incorrect. During the winters in Rome, so it's kind of between sort of the October to April time frame, or October to May time frame. That obviously includes more than winter, but the cold time of year. October to May, both the daily minimum and max temperatures are colder than Nairobi, where all year round Nairobi is warmer. Should say not is warmer, is above 10 degrees at night and above 20 degrees during the day for peak, min, and max temps. Another thing that we could talk about here is that, just as another little side note, Rome is only warmer than Nairobi. Kind of at the very peak of summer, so basically in June, July, and August. And the rest of the year, Nairobi is usually the warmer climate. So comment on the maximum and minimum temperatures in the two cities, on how the maximum and minimum temperatures in the two cities vary over a year. Okay, so if we think about looking at this. We're looking at the variation between the maximum, meaning the one with the crosses, and the minimum, the one with the dots. So the maximum temperatures here in Rome, they actually vary quite a bit. So the max and minimum temperatures in the two cities, if we take a look at the maximum here in Rome, over the course of a year, they're pretty much all the same from year to year. So if we just look, that's the range. The maximum daily temperature goes from roughly 13 degrees up to about 28 degrees. So Rome, max temp varies from approximately 13 degrees to 28 degrees, which is about 15 degrees in a year. And the minimum temperatures in Rome sort of do a similar thing, from roughly 5 to about 17 degrees. So the Rome min temp ranges from, what do we say, approximately 5 degrees Celsius to about 17 degrees Celsius. It was more like 13 degrees Celsius. So about 8 degrees over the course of a year. In Nairobi, let's look at them. The maximum temp that's sort of at about, I don't know, 26 degrees or so, 27 degrees, and just above 20, so from 20 to 26 degrees. So from about 26 to 20 degrees, and at nighttime it's going roughly between about 10 degrees and maybe 14 degrees. 10 degrees to 14 degrees. So in Nairobi, there is less yearly, I guess I could say less variation in a year. The max temp varies between 20 to 26 degrees, about a 6-degree range, and the min temp varies between about 10 and 14 degrees. So that's 4 degrees Celsius. Since Nairobi temps have a smaller range, they are more consistent. A couple of other things we might notice here is just that the Rome has quite clearly one peak in each year, and Nairobi sometimes has these little secondary peaks which might have things to do with monsoons and other kind of climate that they have in Nairobi that's different than in Europe. So here you can see that there's more than one peak during the year, and in Rome there's only one peak. So we can add that here as well. Also in Nairobi, there is more than one peak in the max temps during the year. We could also add here the major peak is in January for Nairobi, and the second smaller peak is in September. Rome only has one peak and trough per year. Peaks in kind of the July-June range, so July/August. And you can get that again by looking at the graphs and just carefully looking for where the peaks are and making sure that you talk about them in some detail. Okay, next question. Richard has been told that both the maximum and minimum temperatures vary less in Rome than they do in Nairobi. Do the graphs support this? Well, it's kind of exactly what we were just talking about. No, he's totally incorrect. Whoever's telling him these things is lying. The temperature range again in Nairobi is about 6 degrees and 4 degrees for the day and night temperatures. And the temperature range in Rome, was around 13 and 15 degrees between day and night, or from the maximum to minimum throughout the year. So there is actually a lot more variation in between the maximum and minimum temperature in Rome. So, no. I'm just going to pause this and write it, and you can read it when I'm done. So here I'm just going to say, no, the max and min temp in Rome have a larger range of values throughout the year, so there's more variation in Rome. And if I hadn't put all that evidence about the numbers up here in the previous question, that it was, sort of between those different values, using the actual numbers from the graph, I would do it down here in this answer, but because I've already said it there, I'm not going to repeat myself again. If they want the evidence, they can look for it there. So we could basically say the graphs do not support this idea. Richard thinks that the temperature appears to be rising in Rome, so it will get warmer in the future. Well, Richard doesn't appear to be very bright, because so far he's proved him wrong on everything. So if we come back up here and look at these temperatures in Rome, he's saying the temperature appears to be rising. So that's kind of looking for a long-term trend here. And if we examine this graph super carefully, we'll notice that the maximum temperatures stayed the same over the 3-year period that we were looking for both the peak and the trough on the maximum daytime temperatures. And for the minimum temps, the nighttime temps, the peaks on those stay the same, and the trough, well, there's maybe a half a degree variation over the 3 years, so there's a very minor increase there, but nothing that he could use to support a massive temperature increase. So I would say here again, no, the graphs do not support this. The peak and trough max daily temps show no long-term increase in values for the min temp, and the peaks have stayed the same over the 3 years. There's a very slight increase of about 1 degree Celsius in the trough of the mins, but it's not significant, and this does not support the rising temperatures in Rome. Question E. Is Richard correct to say that the difference between the maximum and minimum temperature is less in Rome? Justify your answer using the graphs. So for this question, he's actually looking to make the comparison from day to night. What's the difference in the temp? So we can see from day to night in Rome, and just a few spots there, my range of roughly 5 to 13, about 8 degrees. From Yeah, from 13 to about 28. Sorry, that's about 17 to about 28 or so. That's about 10 degrees. So here we're looking at 8 and kind of 10 degrees between the day and nighttime temperatures. And in Nairobi, we go from kind of like 12 to 25. That's quite a big difference. And the best of it, when's the smallest gap for these guys? Probably in here. The smallest gap there is still pretty substantial. From 13 to 23, that's about 10 degrees. And here, my biggest one, 12 to 25, is about 13 degrees. And looking at this, the gap between Nairobi is usually of the bigger extent. So I'd say the difference between day and nighttime temperatures, between the max and min temperatures like they're asking, is actually more significant or bigger in Nairobi than it is in Rome. So he is correct to say that the difference between max and min temperatures is less in Rome. The difference in Rome ranges between 8 and 10 degrees Celsius, whereas it is a larger difference in Nairobi of about 10 to 14 degrees Celsius. So he was correct on that question. And last one here. Richard wants to live somewhere warm. Should he choose Rome or Nairobi? So justify your answer by referring to the graphs, discuss any limitations of the data or other research you would need to do before making a valid decision. So there's a lot of things we could talk about here, and I might just speak to them. You've probably got your own ideas. This is a lot of common sense in this exam, but if he wants to be someplace warm, generally Nairobi is warmer at all times of the year, at all times of the day. It never drops below 10 degrees. The daytime usually gets up to about 20 degrees. And it's not uncomfortably that hot either. I mean, 26, 27 degrees is warm, but it's not too bad. Rome, on the other hand, it regularly drops below 10 degrees throughout half the year, and in the other half of the year, it is warm, but it's only warmer than Nairobi about half of the year. The other half of the year, it's actually quite cold compared to Nairobi. So if I was going to make a recommendation to him, I would probably recommend Nairobi because the temperatures do stay above 10 degrees at night and 20 degrees during the day on average. And it gets much colder in the winter in Rome. If I was going to think about other things he could investigate, it might be interesting to note what kind of weather or climate these have. This is just temperature. So what about rain? Does he want to live someplace that's warm but rains all the time? Or warm but it never rains? So what is the climate like for that? The living conditions? Cost of living, housing conditions, in what situation is it going to be most comfortable and most warm? Like, some of the houses in New Zealand aren't very warm. So it might be the case that he might be warmer even if it's colder in Rome if the houses are really toasty there compared to Nairobi. So those would be things that I would investigate further. Also information like cost of living could be important. But in general, I would recommend Nairobi because it's warmer year-round than Rome, if he wants to be warm, but I would want to investigate that kind of idea about monsoons and other climate conditions, because he might enjoy the climate in Rome better than Nairobi, and he would want to investigate that. And of course, if you want to look at any of these answers in detail, you can always go to NZQA and look at the actual answer schedule for 2011, because that's where this exam question came from.